and working. Sorry. I was saying that I'm very pleased and very happy that we have Christoph Flückiger presenting his work on assessing and working with human strengths in clinical settings. Are the signals positive or just noise? This is the title of the presentation. And I know it doesn't need any introduction, but anyway, I will give some details of his academic career. He did all his graduate work at University of Bern in Switzerland, heavily influenced by the late Klaus Grohe work on resources in psychotherapy. He then went to the University of Wisconsin as a postdoctoral fellow to work with Bruce Lompold. And after 2 years, he came back to the University of Zurich and is currently the head of the Department of Clinical Psychology 2. And I guess that 2 means CBT, right? I'm sure that all of you know him very well for his great job as editor of psychotherapy research since 2019, and is also highly cited researcher for his meta-analysis on the therapeutic alliance. And Christoph has also developed experimental research with generalized anxiety disorder, very cleverly contrasting one condition of priming resources with another one priming problems. Finally, I would like to highlight his recent meta-analysis published in Psychotherapy Research, which is very relevant to our presentation today. Strength-based methods, a narrative review and comparative multi-level meta-analysis of positive interventions in clinical settings. So Christoph, I hope that I didn't make many mistakes presenting you. Thank you very much for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. It's always shameful to just hear these presentation of what people are doing and so on. Yes, okay, yeah, thank you very much that you are here. What I would like to discuss today is actually, we would like to have a little bit fun together. But as clinician, you probably also just have the impression that maybe positive is not always positive. For example, this is just here, this cartoon. Oh, it's just in your head right now, right? So just be positive. Slaps. Oh, I feel so much better, thank you. So this just shows that maybe, yeah, just head up and nothing, to think nothing, it's probably not so positive. And actually, this is probably what we would not have in psychotherapy. So today, I would like to discuss a little bit fundamental clinical, but also methodological issues if we assess human strength. And I would just say this is not a closing talk. In contrast, this is just a beginning of, and to give some ideas or maybe, input to how we could move further. First, I would like to start with clinical impressions. And maybe you remember this study of Rosenhan, 1973, actually probably all in Europe, in all bachelor studies, you just know this experiment. Actually, there were 7 people, same usual psychologists, and also one physician that just went to into a hospital in US, and then they had a cover story to hear voices, but not really bad voices or too bad voices. And then they just went into these hospitals and just took a look how long they were in these inpatient treatments. And the real results were actually that they were up to several weeks in these psychiatric inpatient clinics. Also, the reports there were very interesting. The observations of the professionals, sometimes especially the patients, were aware that these probably are not patients, these pseudo patients, but not the professionals did not detected these individuals as pseudo patients. So one interpretation was just that maybe in insane places as hospitals or inpatient clinics, there is a negative bias on interpretations in clinical context. So this study has huge impact, especially for DSM and ECD, tend to just assess, to get a better assessment of disorders. So if we now look 50 years later, it's a little bit interesting and also a little bit scary that actually this Rosenhan experiment was not a very good conducted experiment. So it was even Callahan just was very precise. She was just, she got there to the original data that were actually not available until the death of Rosenhan. And she went into the data, but also asked the participants that are alive about their experiences. And they were actually not so negative as Rosenhan would say. They had sometimes also positive experiences. And actually, it was not even clear if all participants really went into these outpatient clinics. So that's a little bit astonishing, but even more astonishing is that we do not have much replication of this Rosenhan experiment, especially in controlled situation. And one claim would be that clinicians are, especially in the first impression, are biased in such clinics because of the context. Now, if we just go to first to the literature and social psychology of first impressions, it's quite a different, I would say, finding that the general notion would be that humans are not so bad in first impressions, especially in the to evaluate educational level and general health. Especially in medicine now, first clinical impressions got a really hot topic, especially because clinicians often have to judge in a very fast, for example, in emergency room or in surgery. So this is actually in medicine more general. First clinical impressions got in the last years a huge research interest. So we have now a little bit a tricky situation. On one hand, we have this Rosenhan experiment where it's just where is the claim that clinicians are really horribly biased, and on the other hand, we could say maybe also as a psychotherapist, but we are maybe clinical experts and may have a quite good clinical judgment in sense of also have first clinical impressions. So this would be a little bit the contradictory hypothesis here. Clinicians are negatively biased, or they are experts and actually are quite good in understanding about to get a balanced understanding of clients. So these are just the hypotheses in if Rosenhan experiment would be really true, then it would be that especially in symptom-focused condition, in symptom or severity-focused conditions, therapists would have rate their patients with higher severity, lower resilience strength, lower global assessment of functioning, and lower expected bond. So we did here an experiment or two experiments, and actually they had a very simple structure. First, it got, of course, the introduction of the experiments. Then it was case 1 or case 2. They had a short introduction about the patient, and then also a 2-minute or video about the patient. And now this is the experimental condition. In one condition, therapists had to recall the patient's strength of these videos and of these clinical excerpts, or they had to remember the problems. And afterwards, we just, the therapists just evaluated very usual questionnaires for example, the global assessment of functioning, or the symptom checklist by the Rogatis. So just to see this simple way, we just had actually professional actresses that just played moderate cases of GAD. These were actually 2 cases, and sometimes therapists had to evaluate in the strength condition, the first case, and in the other, the second case. So all was then a balanced design, so a proper small design experiment. This would be here just the overview of the experiment. Here would be the different steps. So the excerpts, the description of the patient with videos, then the priming or recall task, and then the patient evaluation with the questionnaires. We did 2 experiments that they were a little bit different in sense. In the first study, for example, for this recall task, the therapists just were able to speak about the patients, and here they had, in the second experiment, they had to write their thoughts about the patient. Okay, now I have a little bit of problem with, now it works. So just to get an idea of the therapists that we investigated, these were actually usual therapists in Germany, Switzerland, or Austria. They always had also a professional experience, and you see quite a huge range of the age. So here are just the results of the first experiment, and what we just can see is that actually in the resource priming or strength strength condition, the therapists rated their patients slightly higher in their resilience and a little bit higher in the global assessment of functioning, but not in the problems. And this is actually interesting, because Rosenhan would say therapists are especially biased in the negativity, but these results here would just say a little bit different, would have a different, it's a different result actually, that clinicians especially would underestimate the strength of the patients and the functioning. We also, in the replication now, where we were maybe also a little bit more precise, we got the biases or the effects in all different questionnaires. So to just get to the point, we found also here in these experiments, a slight bias in therapists' evaluation of the patients. So they are not robust in evaluate the patient's first impressions. But what we also saw, that these effects were very, very small. Just to show you this global assessment of function, this was about 4. So a really small difference between, if we have a scale between 0 and 100. So the effects, even significant, are not extremely huge. So this is just an example that I think we probably should continue to just also take experimental research on therapists. And of course, we really do not know much based on the Rosenhan experiment, for example. We should also just take a look on different professions, maybe also different cases, not just mild patients, but also severely impaired patients, for example. Another instruction could be, we instructed the therapist that these are patients, but we also just could say, ask the evaluation if this would be friends. Of course, this was an explicit recall, but we also could have more subliminal recalls. So this brings me to the next, also a little bit challenge that we have in the assessment of positivity. So first, we just could say maybe we have slight biases in the interpretations of the clinicians, but we really do not know until now how strong these biases really are. And there are 2 hypotheses. First, there are biases, therapists, or there are experts and are really good in balancing different perspectives. Okay, let's now move to assessments of well-being, but also clinical scales. So we could just, this would be first the definition of mental health, the most modern, perhaps, in the World Health Organization. What we just can see is, I very much like this definition, and maybe, it just also shows that health is really more than just the absence of mental disorders. It has to do with goals, with well-being, and also socioeconomic development and participation. So it's really a broad understanding of what mental health really means. On a more theoretical or graphical point of view, we could just say, of course, patients would have problems and not so many strength or resiliences, then their mental health status probably is quite low. Or on the other hand, if we have many strength and not so many problems, then probably our state is quite good and we are happy. So what's nice actually, that we all are here probably on this net of positivity and negativity. So let's now go a little bit more into these questionnaires that we have. And it's actually a wonderful study of Jan Bunke, a little bit older, but it's quite illustrative. If we just go into well-being questionnaires in the usual population or normal population, what we can see actually amazingly, it's not well-being is not in the middle of the rating. It's actually, it has the tendency to go into suffering. So me of the general population is a little bit lower than 0, which is interesting per se. Why this happened, and maybe you all are researchers and so on, maybe we also like a little bit to be active, and maybe it would not be a good idea to just say, oh, today I'm totally relaxed. To your chef, they would say, oh, I'm so relaxed, I'm so happy. Then the chef probably would, chief probably would say, hey, you need a little bit more work. So the issue is, but if we think about others, and if we think especially about patients, they probably have a little bit different idea about well-being of the general population. That's probably here. All others have such a good life. It's so nice, and all. Yeah, it's like Wonderland. All other have all Wonderland. That might be an idea of yeah, what we probably think about others. Not too much, of course, but a little bit. So all is good. Me, I have to work, but all others are so relaxed. And it's, of course, my error that I'm not so relaxed than the others. So that would be maybe a cognition, or just an example of a cognition. So we have if we just take a look on the well-being measurements, a little bit issue that maybe that we have a difference between the expected well-being of others and how we think about us, and also if we think about maybe clinical populations, then we probably have an issue in this more global well-being scales, that they are not so very specific on problematic aspects. So question would be, what is normal suffering and what is unrealistic well-being? So we do not have really much on this construction, much insights about these questions. So let's go now to a clinical questionnaire. And are there strengths? Usually we would say no, we do not assess strength in clinical questionnaires, even they have they are quite specific. Usually we just probably would think, or one way in such questionnaires would be to just take a look on categorical cut-off points, yes, as social reference. So we would just say, okay, are their cutoffs, oh yeah, in this example, for example, interpersonal severity and depression are bad, okay? We also could have the more the idea that the point is 0 also in these questionnaires. This means that the general population would have 0 problems in these questionnaires. And of course, then we would see, oh, then this looks quite bad. So there are so many, this person really has many categories where it's not 0, yes. But as we also saw in the well-being questionnaires, it's actually issue that probably 0 is not the usual way how people are living. So it's maybe also we have to accept also in clinical and especially non-clinical samples that suffering is also a little bit normal. And then we would get to a picture in a clinical question, probably something like this. We would see, oh yes, persons have problems, but also we would say, huh, that's interesting. There are areas of where patients do not have problems. In this particular case, it was actually really a patient with depression, and she was not able to go out anymore to the out of her to have daily, to go outside on any supermarket and so on. But it was interesting when I asked her, but it seems to be that you are not so anxious. Then she just answered in this particular case, yes, I really depressed and I would not go anymore out. This is really horrible for me, but actually I'm not so anxious. And I'm not so anxious about people. Also, yeah. Oh, okay. It seems also here. What this means in the clinical case, if we also talk about things that really are unproblematic, we probably also get a clinical idea how these things might be related to each other. Or maybe it's better that this patient does not have anxiety, and maybe it's easier to just go outside in such a case, in contrast if a patient would have in addition social phobia. So this was just a clinical case that we probably have to explore both sides of the coin if we go into clinical questions to get an understanding of the patient. So to close this assessment point, one tricky issue that we sometimes a little bit do not talk too much is that we probably have an overestimation of well-being in the general population, especially patients. And on the other hand, we probably have also in clinical questionnaires, if we think about cutoff criteria, and so a little bit attentional focus on the suffering part of these measures, and sometimes lose a little bit these parts here. Next possibility to just assess positive mental health would be ecological momentary assessment or therapy or treatment. So what we did here, or what I just bring here into the discussion, is actually quite easy ecological momentary assessment, where we just ask the patients to report negative episodes during a week that was before therapy, but also positive episodes. And one interesting issue is, of course, that patients also at the beginning of therapy, they just report positive episodes during a week. And of course, during treatment, you might remember also, oh, this is a little bit back mood diary. And just that actually would be the mechanism for behavioral activation, that where the theory would be, if we act, then our mood would get better. And usual depression, rational would be, I'm depressed and therefore I can't go out. So this seems to actually not using ecological momentary assessment, but Beck used these diaries to just probably also show that positive episodes in the week are usual. Also, interestingly, what we saw in recent research is that such episodes, positive episodes and negative episodes, are quite independent of each other. So it can really be on the day that in the morning I'm a little bit depressed or I have worrying, but in the afternoon it's much better. So it's interesting, and I think I really hope that ecological momentary assessment will bring us much more insights about the variability of positive and negative episodes during a day of patient. So this brings me to further interventions, positive interventions. And if we think about positive interventions, you might think perhaps about positive psychotherapy, but there are actually also quite a range of different treatments that would claim to be strength-based, for example, solution-focused therapy, or mechanisms like resource activation or strength-based CBT and so on. We excluded actually mindfulness and behavioral activation because in this meta-analysis here, because there were separate meta-analyses for just these both very specific also interventions. So the minimal standard was that actually in our meta-analysis now that the patient should be diagnosed, that therapists should be usual therapists in the sense that should have a degree for psychotherapy, and they should have contact with, client should have a contact with a psychotherapy, so no self-help tools. We just also screened a little bit the other meta-analysis, already published meta-analysis, and it was amazing about the range of the different meta-analysis that contrasted positive psychotherapy. Some meta-analysis had 0 effects, and some just showed a G or a Cohen's d about 90. And why such a range happens, which is actually a little bit scaring, isn't it? One aspect, if we just saw quite huge effect sizes, was that the meta-analysis just included waiting lists or treatments, or not waiting lists or treatment as usual that were not a real treatment. And no of these meta-analysis, that was very interesting, had contrasts with real psychotherapy in the sense that bona fide therapy, in the sense that there were really trained therapists. What we also saw, if 0 effects were quite often if there were studies integrated with prevention, for example, samples that were not so suffering. So overall, there was a huge range of different findings here in positive psychotherapy, especially probably because of the control groups and also the investigated non-clinical populations. So that was actually also the goal now, to just take those studies that really contrasted psychotherapy with psychotherapy. And what we found is actually not so many studies that just fulfilled this bona fide criterion. And most of the studies, interestingly, were conducted in Germany. And most also were in the context of CBT, where strengths-based CBT was contrasted with a more usual manual. To get, Lily is here also to get to the results. What you just can see, that we have a tendency that strength-based methods had a slight additional benefit in comparison to the other bona fide treatments. But of course, a D of 0.16 is not huge. It's just what we, for example, also find in feedback interventions, where feedback or not feedback, this is then up, these are effect sizes about 0.16 to 0.20, and these are actually very small effects. So we cannot say that strengths-based methods are just absolutely more effective than others, but maybe there would be a slight tendency to help the patient to get into treatment. And we also could argue that they are not worse than other approaches. The literature was not very biased. This means that we had quite, these are small studies here, and these are huge studies, and you can see that there are small studies that smaller or larger studies that just report high effect sizes, but also lower effect sizes. So there was no significant indication of publication bias. If we go into more process-based studies, they are actually extremely complex often, because these are minute by minute ratings. And what we just could say is in-session outcomes that most studies actually reported positive connections of strength-based moments with in-session outcomes. Two also showed mixed results, but overall it was actually probably not a risk factor. But it's interesting actually also to see that, for example, if in two of these studies, they just reported if a patient in the first 30 minutes had actually not such a good or productive session, then the therapist started to really foster the strength of the patients. But the patient was quite reactant to these interventions of the therapist. So we just could get the interpretation that strength-based interventions probably are not most powerful if a patient is not, if the therapy doesn't work. So maybe they need other interventions, such as, for example, validations or something like this. But at the moment, we really do not know what's the good timing of positive interventions. And of course, we also had a little bit the problem of the chicken and egg problem, in sense, maybe if patients get better, then also, of course, you can foster this situation. But interestingly, as our RCTs just shows that therapists can be more or less sensitive about such moments during therapy. So future direction. So I started with just our clinician bias, and we really do not know much about this. Then how we can assess mental health, and also how we could develop strength-based methods. And I would say there is much room for, and maybe same places for future researchers. For example, we really are not very good in assessing client strengths at intake, as I just showed in or discussed in well-being questionnaires. We are not so good in also assessing client strength in a more qualitative manner. Of course, I'm sure that all of us also started there to get really good interviews, but we are not at the point that we can say we have solved this issue to assess strength. But also the self-perception of strength is a tricky issue, as we just discussed. There are social reference issues in there that we have that are tricky to assess during for a questionnaire action. So we have issues with therapist first impressions, and we, in comparison to normal medicine, we probably have not many studies or a good knowledge how therapists get first clinical impressions, and maybe they are really also important for us how they therapists act also during therapy. It's really a moment-to-moment process, and there we do not have much knowledge how therapists also act to strength of the patients and so on. Assessing strength using ecological momentary assessment. There are not much of such studies in the literature, but seems to be promising. But also, of course, working with ecological momentary therapy and then or treatment to really use these assessments for therapeutic progress. And of course, we need more RCTs that just contrast, for example, positive psychotherapy with psychotherapy, and of course also in clinical populations. Actually, we found zero positive psychology intervention or therapy contrasting usual psychotherapy. Maybe it's even better, and now we already have 1 or 2 RCTs, but when we conducted this 2 years ago, we did not find any of such interventions. So, thank you very much for your attention. We have actually also a little bit room for discussions, probably also, and also, of course, maybe also room for for questions or further discussions based on my talk or the slides.
Thank you so much, Christoph, for this stimulating presentation. We have time for questions, about 15 minutes.
First off, I'm wondering, from all of your research on positive outcomes, do you have like a favorite measure that you would recommend for people to use?
Yes, STL90. Why? Because on a clinical point of view. Why? Because STL90 is you have really the whole range of symptoms, and it's of course extremely, then you really see the problems in these questions, but also the non-problems, which is on well-being questionnaires often is because they are general, and then you also just see on the cases that they have non-well-being, which makes it really hard. This is one, on a clinical point of view, I really think STL90 is quite good. There are also new developments in Witten. Jan Schürmann and Ulrike Wilotzki did a very interesting question that are very situation specific. So this, and of course, we also, for example, Miguel just started to develop interviews to just have really specific, communications with the patients, what they think are their strength. And we also did this actually, 10 years ago, we just had questions about clinical interviews to just assess individual strength. But to get really a good psychometric assessment of strength, I think it's also a conceptual tricky issue, because it's always the action of the patients in there. Does it answer to your question, or?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The other question / thought that I had was, I love the way that you do the continuum. Like, you have people, instead of choosing from no disease to disease, right? They're asking about how badly they feel. Like, that's how we usually do it, right? Like, how worse are your symptoms? You ask them from good to bad, and it sort of shifts the whole state of mind of measurement. So I think that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, so now the question part, most of us have deficit measures. We don't have those range measures that you're describing. Would you consider kind of using creating within person scale, you know what I mean? Like, how do you turn deficit measures and shift them into a strength perspective with the data that we do have?
Right, that's actually an interesting question. Maybe we also should start to just get other indices than, into the suffering part. Maybe we also just could get very simple indices of maybe, for example, the meaning of non-problems,
Right.
We never thought about, or I'm not aware about such measures, but if we just think together, I think we could start actually quite fast to explore such, to explore such easy indicators.
Yeah.
That would be one possibility. We have actually in Germany a so-called resource focused questionnaire that really is extremely specific. But again, usually we have the problem that the questionnaires are too global.
Yeah, great, super helpful. Great talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Christoph, let me ask you a question. What is in your mind the connection conceptually between positive moments and resources?
Positive moments in psychotherapy.
Yes.
In outside of psychotherapy.
I was thinking about your study with ecological complementary assessment, in which you measured positive and negative episodes, and I was wondering if we should consider every positive moment as a kind of manifestation of a resource of the client, or if it could be misleading, this idea. I was also thinking about the profile of the client that you showed with low anxiety, and theoretically it's possible to think that someone with low anxiety may have also low motivation to change, and that somehow you need anxiety to change the client. So in a sense, low anxiety, not so, this is just pure speculation, of course.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, I fully agree that we can really have extremely lot of such hypotheses, and I think we should test them. Mm-hmm. But we often just are quite into the suffering box, yes? And that we are so precise in, is it depression, is it anxiety, and so on, but we are not really precise on the other side of the point. So that would be and maybe, of course, this is actually also a problem of our information processing, because, a broad and build theory would say, if we are positive, we get also a little bit maybe overgeneralized. How are you? Oh, it's good. There is probably also in the concept of positivity something that we just generalize to the positivity.
So, but you would see positive moments as a sign of resources of the client, right?
So I would probably say there are two different general kinds of positive moments. It can be a positive moment where problems are absolutely not in the room, yes?
Yeah.
Where you just would say, oh, there is so much positivity also in the emotion, nothing negativity. So this would be one situation, and the other situation would be where you have grief or where you have really negative emotions in the room, but also positive ones.
Okay.
Does it make sense for you? It would also be interesting.
Yes, I was thinking in which way the second condition would be a sign of flexibility, that you can take the good with bad, because life is not black and white, right? Just a thought.
Right. And also, of course, it could be also action, that we really are good in action, that we have change, for example, also. And then we get happy because we have change.
Sure.
And
Thank you.
Arthur Bohart is also here. What do you think about about the question that Miguel asked? I'm not sure if you are hearing, but maybe. Aha, it's out now. No, but okay.
So, other questions?
Of course, I also would love to just hear from you what your ideas are, or what was stimulating for you. Maybe not questions, but thoughts that you had. What could be further steps in this area? Even it's maybe it's it's just a brainstorming of ideas also.
Any comments? Karina, would you like to? I'm sure that you know Karina developed with me the interview to assess resources that we submit to psychotherapy research recently, and she's finishing her PhD, so perhaps she has questions.
No, I just thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoy it. But I was just thinking about what you said, that you don't know the timing. I think is that this dance between negative and positive across the therapy is hard. And in future, I read a lot of papers, inclusive your papers about this, and I was wondering if we can have more data about how to use this in a more effective way. If it's better to, I know there is a study that talk about this, it's better to start at beginning of the session and after that go to the problem. And I don't know, I think in the future this could be investigated in a more complex way to understand better how this articulation can happen throughout the therapy.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, we have also here a fundamental problem. If we talk about strength, then we do not talk about suffering, and we do not work maybe also about precisely on issues why patients are coming to psychotherapy. And actually, there are meta-analyses and very constant results. If problems are should not be discussed in the therapy room, then the effect sizes of such treatments, contrast treatments, control treatments are really worse. So there is need that in psychotherapy there is not a stigma of problems. Maybe one could even, this is a conceptual, a little bit a tricky issue, we could say that the first one of the first strength-oriented interventions is that we really allow the patients to talk about their problem, that there is not anymore a stigma that should be, where patients could not talk about their problems. Mm-hmm. So it's really a strength that they are able to talk. But we are not good until now. What's a good range, for example? And if we how to generate the good range? Actually, we are just doing it. Yes. in our feelings, what we think is clinical okay. And maybe this is absolutely okay. But we do not know if we change these timings that they get better. Maybe even it could get worse. And there we probably need experimental or much more. We need much more studies about timing, probably.
Some other questions or comments?
Well, maybe not a question, but more a thought. I'm thinking, so what is strength actually? And it shouldn't, is it the same, or I'm not sure what your opinion is? Because I was thinking about, is it not in life really more about resilience, which gives you strength? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I have the,
yeah, it's actually, I think it's a little bit the problem, the concept of resilience. It's actually a negative concept. It means the absence of problems, or what can, and this is a negative definition actually. And we really don't, with this tradition of the definition, we really don't know what's in there. So it's probably hard, it's like hardiness, but we do not know how they get hard to get hardiness. So
I'm not sure if it's, is it the definition that it's the, oh, how did you say? I think it's dealing with problems in a way. You keep on, you keep the ground, but you're still dealing with problems.
Right.
In my
Which
opinion,
makes
that's
sense.
resilience.
Yeah, which makes sense on one hand, but it's also the question how we deal with non-problems, or for example, with needs, with values.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for the attention and for this discussion. I love such discussion.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, it's 5 o'clock in my time. So just on time. Christoph, thank you so much once again for this presentation. Wonderful articulation of different kind of research. I love the research with the therapist also, and I look forward to see more data on that. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much again, Christoph, for your beautiful presentation. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.